Unbabel was actually started as a conversation during a surf trip by the founders. And we have we have offices, we call them towers, the towers of Unbabel. And one of our towers is called T-Surf, and it's down at a place called Arafana in the south of Portugal, which just has an amazing surf beach. Every Thursday morning, the staff in Lisbon go surfing together. So I turned up from the UK, my first Thursday here, I arrive in the office and there's nobody here. Where is everybody? They've all gone surfing.
Hey everyone, welcome to Dev Interrupted. I'm your host, Dan Lyons, and today I'm joined by Jonathan Sowler, the VP of Engineering at Unbabel. Quick reminder for our listeners, if you haven't already rated and reviewed the show on your podcasting app of choice, particularly Apple Podcasts, please do so. Reviews are a crucial way that our show gets discovered. Jonathan, let's start with giving our audience the opportunity to get to know you a little bit better before we jump into your role at Unbabel. I understand you have a degree from Oxford in philosophy, psychology, neurophysiology. With that type of interesting background, how did you get into your path of engineering leadership?
I went to university in the days before machine learning degrees, and there was no machine learning. So I actually went to university to study mathematics and was kind of interested in the brain and connectionist theory, and there was nowhere to go and study. I didn't know at the time there was some places in California and Canada, obviously, in Toronto, but there wasn't much on offer. And I changed courses halfway through and came out with a degree in neurophysiology, philosophy, which was absorbing, and psychology.
That's really interesting. What effect has that had on you?
Good question. I think when machine learning started to be a big thing, it certainly made it attractive. It was like, yes, that's what I was trying to study 10, 20 years ago. And now it's it. Now, finally, I can remember when I was studying, was very interested in what even then was called artificial intelligence. And I remember a quote from a French philosopher that it was neither intelligence and lacked artifice. And I just thought, well, okay, maybe now's not the time. So after a 20 years pause, some of the skills that I developed became marketable, and companies started working in the area.
Oh, for sure. I mean, if you're in machine learning, AI, anything like that, those are the sexiest buzzwords in the engineering community for a little bit now, right?
Yes, for the last 10, 15 years.
Now, also in your background, I see, you've been a CTO. Obviously, you're the VP of engineering at Unbabel, incredible company. We're going to get into that. Was there any inflection point in your engineering career that kind of launched you into being a leader?
It was a little more than I was working I started as an engineer, worked as a developer. And then back in the 90s, I don't know how people remember, back in the 90s, the internet came along and I started a business with some acquaintances that really started with a business plan that was as simple as the internet will be big. People will use the internet to do real business. So they need security. So from that was born a little company that made some good decisions around working with Java. And we started with cryptographic protocols, and so the cryptographic algorithms, and then built protocols, and then started to work with non-repudiation and some of the different identity and some of the building blocks that you need to build meaningful, secure systems. And it was through that I was part of the leadership team of that business and started to enjoy working with engineers, understanding how you build product. And it was the early days of product management didn't exist as a thing in quite the way it is today. And that and then that business was sold to Sun Microsystems in 2000. And that really launched me into a career in technology and technology leadership and working in this space.
That's incredible. Was that kind of security business? Was it, I guess maybe not considered a startup, but was it like a small company that you got to grow with, or was it already big when you got there?
It was a couple of people sitting behind a motorway service station in a place called South Mims off the M25, just north of London. So
that's amazing.
Behind the service station, you'll see a White House. It was there when I joined. And I think the first day we spent cleaning the walls and not really talking about products. And we grew from there to be about 70, 80 people. We started in London. We ended up with quite a presence in the US. And because we'd picked Java as the language to grow with, we built very close relationships with the great team at Sun and the JavaSoft team. And it was a fabulous experience. I was sort of in my mid-20s at the time. It was just great to be great. It was an exciting time.
A lot of people probably in our audience would love to be in your position, like a VP of engineering of an incredible company. A lot of them are kind of like one point in their career will take a risk or say, hey, I don't know, maybe if security was the thing back then, but hey, I'm going to go join this little company or I'm going to try something. Did you feel like you were taking a risk or was it just like, hey, this is something interesting, I'm going to try it?
It was the latter. So there was no risk. There was no sense in your 20s, even now, you don't feel I'm not losing anything. It's exciting. I have no idea how this will turn out. In fact, I don't really know how the product develops. I don't know. We had some competition. I don't know where the competition will come from. It's a good idea. I can see the value. I know people will pay money for this.
Yeah.
And we're filling, if you think about how electronic commerce at the time, it was called electronic commerce, how electronic commerce is going to develop. Well, fundamentally, it needs this thing. So, this thing has value. We really went from there.
Thanks for sharing that story. A little bit of a transition now to Unbabel and your role there and the team that you've built. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about Unbabel, what it does, and kind of your role and your team there?
Unbabel is a translation company. Dominant use case is customer service. So if you think about a big multinational, let's say Acme Corporation, and they employ customer service agents, and the customer service agents work in global markets, so they need to speak different languages. Well, Unbabel as a translation company plugs into those customer service agents, and so you can use English agents to deal seamlessly with Japanese or German or French customers without the agent needing to speak any other language than English, dealing with the tone of voice, dealing with the style of the company that Acme is, and the end customer, the Japanese customer, or German customer, the French customer, will have no idea that they're talking to an English agent. And so you imagine for a business that is running customer service globally, it means that you don't have to scale all of your language support to handle peak load. You don't need enough Japanese agents to handle Christmas Day all year round. You can employ enough people. And then when you hit a certain limit, you can get English agents to pick up the Japanese language and deal with Japanese tickets and chats and inquiries. And similarly, it gives you in the customer service space some insulation from the inefficiency that language support through humans will drive. We work in partnership with some of the biggest multinational companies in the space. We work with many of the BPOs in the space, providing real time for chat, very high quality translations in the customer service world, integrating with their agent systems.
Is most of the technology built around like a chat base? Like I go to, I don't know, somebody's website, I'm a customer, I need support, and I'm talking to them through a drift chat or whatever chat. How does it actually work in a real life experience?
So if you think we have sort of two base products at the moment, one is synchronous. It's an ongoing chat conversation. And so it needs to be quick. And the other is asynchronous, when you submit a ticket and you've got some time to wait. And if you think about what we have to do translation, we have machines to do the translation. Right. Machines are quick and they're cheap or relatively cheap, but we know they make mistakes. So machine translation isn't perfect. And we have humans. Humans are a bit slower. They're a bit more expensive, but they generally do a human quality job. And so Unbabel's world is about bringing the two together. And the thing you need to bring machines and humans together is something that understands whether the machine has done a good job. And that we call that big QE. And Unbabel is one of the world's innovators and has recently released something called Comet, which is open source, which allows a machine to mark another machine's homework. And so effectively, the machine does the translation. And then another machine works out whether it's likely to be a good English or a good human-like translation. And at that point, you can take a decision. Well, I'll trust that. I'll go with the machine translation. I'll go with the artificial intelligence, or I'll pass that on to a human. So obviously, if you're dealing with a synchronous translation, you want to focus on the machine translation and you send that back because you haven't got time to go to a human.
Yeah.
But what you can do is understand where you weren't that sure about the translation, and then get a human afterwards to have a look and annotate, and then feed that back into your machine translation engines to allow them to learn and do a better job going forward. And then when you've got some time, the machine does the translation. You can then take a decision. Do I use them, reduce the cost, or do I go with the human translation and I get the quality up, but it's going to take me more time? And being able to sort of decide between cost, quality, and performance gives you the ability to look at different translation use cases and come up with innovative solutions that are very disruptive. And that's Unbabel's business. That's why Unbabel is different to traditional translation houses and LSPs and organizations that play in the space.
It's amazing. I mean, kind of like the pain point or the use case makes so much sense. I mean, if you're a customer, you're in a situation that you're trying to, usually if you're talking to like support or you're kind of like, I want to get something solved here. And you can tell instantly if you're talking to someone, typically, probably if they're not using Unbabel, that is not in your native language, it can be very, very frustrating.
For the business, and there's lots of research that says, if you do business in the language of your customer, you will build a better customer relationship.
For sure.
Strive to do business in that language.
I don't even need any data to prove that to me. I just know that basic human instincts totally make sense. And we can see it, some of the valuations I've seen coming from Unbabel. I don't know if it's official, but you're on your way, $1 billion, value. So totally makes sense to me. What I wanted to dive in just a little bit, from a technical perspective, what are the challenges in building a product that needs to translate these languages on the fly?
You've got a number of different challenges. You've got performance.
Yeah.
You've got the fact that to get a request for a translation into a canonical form that machine translation will recognize and do a good job with, you've got a lot of processing steps to understand what's been submitted and how you get that standard form. You have the QE engine. We have sort of talented engineers that work in that space. And then you've got the ability to schedule work for the large community of human translators. And you want to use that community as effectively as you can. And you want to keep the work coming for them and make sure the right person picks up the right task. And also keep it performant, keep it reliable. You're part of a big brand's conversation with its customers. So the service can't disappear. It needs to be reliable. So you have all of those challenges of providing, and it needs to be 24/7. We have global customers around the world. It needs to be there all the time.
Yeah, there's really no room for lag or we're not having a good performance day in prod or something like that. How do you, I guess, set up your team from a reliability standpoint to ensure that it's always working and working appropriately?
We have a good SRE team, which is always a place to start. We have good practices in monitoring and metrics. And but like many organizations, we have small empowered teams. Those teams are not only responsible for building the software, they're responsible for their operation. And so if a service fails or is slow, it is that team that gets out of bed at 2:00 in the morning to deal with it. And as a result, that team tends to be very focused on testing and reliability. And I think that approach of small empowered teams responsible for development and operation seems to be in the industry delivering the best results in terms of reliability and performance. It makes the team accountable, and teams know accountable, not just for building great software, but for building it to operate and operating it and seeing it work performantly.
You mentioned it's not necessarily unique to Unbabel. And of course, Unbabel is a LinearB customer and we've worked together. What I have seen is, and I talk with a lot of engineering teams, one of the characteristics of more, I would consider elite engineering teams or high functioning engineering teams kind of is that end-to-end responsibility, taking into account, you're going to own what you ship into production. Is that a philosophy that you had to put in from the beginning? Do you hire with that? Like, how does that permeate for you?
That was here. The company that was here when I arrived. So the company, as a startup business, the founders had spent a lot of time looking at best practice. they'd read Accelerate and they'd read all of the books about how you develop that sort of high performance. And as a startup, they had developed some fabulous services that worked and could work that way. And there's some things that we had to work on to get the services robust and resilient, and work on the deployment pipeline so that, the testing was there. Your deployment pipeline is the way you manage risk. And so we spent a lot of time just making sure those pipelines did their job. And engineers love working that way. It seems to be much more natural. Remember the days when you build software, you threw it over a friends to a QA team who sometimes threw it back. And eventually that software would find its way to production. I mean, that was, as an engineer who worked that way, that was just an inherently frustrating way of working. And then finding there was an issue in production that you weren't told about and would come to you when it had escalated. That was a hugely frustrating way of working as an engineer. And this is a much more natural way. The idea that you have control, even over the infrastructure and the resources that an application has, and you can push that out. And there's tests, all of the tests of the pipeline to ensure something is production ready to go. I mean, it is for an engineer, it's just a very natural way to work.
We've seen, even just like the happiness of engineers. If you have low cycle time and fast cycle time, and I can get my code out to production, and I do have the ownership, that just feels better. So I had one job in my career as a developer where my first job out of school, I was building actually like voice recognition software. It was for Nuance, naturally speaking, also for like support agents and that kind of thing. But yeah, I worked on a project for like 6 months, which felt like it was a long time. And then it got passed over to QA, and I never even know what happened to it. I actually quit within a year and joined a startup. So I don't even know if my code made it to production. I just felt like that was the oddest experience ever. And then after that, I joined a startup, and we were more so on the agile. But yeah, I really, because I can see your metrics and I can appreciate all the work that you've done there. I can see it's a very, very important, I guess, tenet of your culture.
Yes. And you spoke, we've adopted LinearB. LinearB has been great. But what we didn't do was to give LinearB to the senior management team and say, now manage the engineering team. We gave it to the engineers and said, this is healthy. So now, we can see whether you're healthy or not. Just make everything green. Show us that the world is healthy. And if it's red, explain why it's red. Explain why the code reviews weren't done. And maybe it's a small team and people were out for a reason. And actually giving them the tools and saying, look, it's your job to show that you've got healthy practices, has helped the culture.
Let's dive in there a little bit. There are different tools out there that can give you metrics about your engineering people or whatever you want. What made you choose to work with our team and choose LinearB?
I think the easy things is you did a lot of the heavy lifting. So for us, we've talked for ages about, we should be measuring cycle times. We should have more information about the developer workflows, and we work in, and we have Jira to manage, to do work management, and a bunch of other tools that the engineers use. And it was just easy to find a tool that's seamlessly integrated. I think we're up and running within a week or two. I spent some time with the CTO, Joe Grasson, who's a real expert in the machine translation space, looking at the results and thinking about the teams. And then we just gave it to the engineering leads who got their teams using it and started using the product stand-ups and understanding how they were doing. And the LinearB team did work with the teams to understand the tool, helped us configure the environments, helped with Slack integrations, and it was adopted seamlessly within a very short period of time.
If we're just, looking at some of the higher level numbers, you've actually had a 60% decrease in cycle time, which is pretty cool to see.
And I imagine as much as it's about LinearB, I imagine a large part of that is people just realizing they're being measured and thinking about it and remembering that cycle time is something that's quite important, and just changing behavior a little bit. But it hasn't happened through any whip cracking, or it happened very naturally.
So that's completely right. One thing that we see around our customer base is the concept of conversations. We're having conversations now. We're talking about these things that matter, where there's bottlenecks within our organization, now that we can have visibility into the numbers. Have you seen that at Unbabel, the conversation starting to happen?
But not only the conversation, but I'm going to use a buzzword, psychologically safe conversations.
Yeah.
So, we try and have an environment where people can raise issues and talk about issues. Not everything goes well. Sometimes we do the wrong thing. Sometimes teams make mistakes. They don't get the planning right. And you just have a culture where someone can put their hand up and say, actually, I've got this wrong. Well, things aren't working. I need to find out why. And so you can have conversations. Why is the cycle time long? Oh, yeah. Okay. And there's no downside. Obviously, if mistakes or issues are being made repeatedly, then you need to take some action. But most engineering teams are self-correcting. If you show them how they're measured and you work with them in a psychologically safe way, they want to do a good job. And most engineering teams want to deliver something of value and do a good job and want to be seen to be doing a good job. So they will change the way they work and they will be very mindful of what they understand good is.
Absolutely. You call it psychological safety. It seems that that's kind of just built into the culture at Unbabel, but you're right. If you have that safety and everyone gets onto the same page of what is happening within engineering, we can all see it. There's the visibility. We're talking in the same language, actually going back to your, original, one of the original purposes on Babel. If we're on the same page, we're speaking the same language. Now we can have a conversation. Maybe where are the bottlenecks, or where could I use some help in my delivery pipeline? It actually seems like you have that built into the culture. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's how do we do a better job? And we all want to do a better job. We want to be world class. I don't think there's anyone who's in the industry who just doesn't want to do a good job. I think if you can inspire people to do better, then teams naturally think about how are we working? Look, our code review depth isn't as deep as it could be. And maybe that's contributing to some of the issues when we push to production. So if you have those conversations and you work with teams on the problems, teams just get better and you build much stronger culture. We've all worked in, toxic environments where that's not the case, where you can't have those conversations, where you're expected to be perfect with every release, which as an engineer, I remember my days as an engineer, I manifestly wasn't. And you made mistakes, or you misunderstood the brief, or you didn't understand quite what the requirement, I would say user requirement. In my days as an engineer, quite often you were given a very large specification, which by the time you'd worked your way through, the world had changed and the user wasn't really interested in what you built. I mean, they were the days that I learned my trade, but things are very different now. And also, Unbabel is much more of the company that, as an ambitious 25-year-old, I would have wanted to work at. I mean, it has that you turn up, you do your best. We have a culture of learning. You can make mistakes. We think about measurements. We think about great practice. And we engage the staff. We don't just tell them how you work. This is how you work. Many of the good ideas come from the engineers. Most of the good, pretty much all of the good ideas come from the engineers. And then there's a bottom-up groundswell to the culture.
That's the perfect way, I think, to see improvement, and you're totally embracing it. You mentioned, for example, review depth, and for our listeners, review depth relates to how much feedback is a developer getting on their pull requests in terms of comments. In terms of the metrics that you care about on Unbabel, how are you approaching it? So, what metrics do you look at? And is it more of guidance from you as the VP of engineering, or is it kind of like, here's the guidance and team leaders, kind of each one of you are responsible? Like, how do you approach the metrics?
The metrics get pushed out. So it's up to the engineering leads to know that they're running a healthy team. Feel accountable for the way that their teams work. And the metrics that we're interested in, obviously the cycle times, which just are great. We just, how big is the MR? How big is the change that you're making? Because if you're making huge changes, we have problems. You're doing too much work without checking it in. And, we do small changes often results in a better product. We look at the amount of rework against new work. And there are times when you are reworking code. There are times when that happens, but just making sure that we expect what we're seeing and the teams have a healthy amount of new work. We're making some progress. We're doing some new things rather than just going over old code and dealing with issues in the old code. So there are lots of things. We look at the code review cycles, how quickly are changes picked up for that peer review, because we know that's important. And are those peer reviews happening? And is everybody doing peer reviews? And just making sure that those things are happening means that I get a bit more sleep at night, that the product, when it gets pushed to production, is in the right state.
Yeah. The peer reviews, the pull request process, it's such a collaborative process. It's a social process. We have a lot of engineers that are now working remote, or you might have people all over the world. And one of the investment areas that we've done within LinearB is what we call our Worker Bee feature. So, essentially what Worker Bee is this kind of intelligent bot that each engineer either can turn on themselves, or you can turn it on at a team level, and it provides awareness on pull requests. Hey, someone's waiting for you, or here's how long it's going to take to review this code. Maybe you should start it after your meeting so you can finish it end to end. How have those Worker Bee team policies been used at Unbabel?
They've been used. I mean, we couple them with good rituals. Software engineering is still a very social process. To have it done well, the team need to talk together. They need to understand what they're waiting on. We have lots of dependencies by team. So we have a lot of small teams, but they have if you imagine what we have is a great big pipeline, and the change that one team makes is going to impact people down the pipeline. And so the dependencies between teams are quite significant. And we also work in a way where we have teams that are very much focused on the translation process. And then we have another set of teams that translate that translation process for each of the use cases that we're targeting, or provide reports and information for our customers. So we have two very different styles of working with fundamental dependencies, which we try and contractualize through APIs in a fairly established way. But there needs to be a lot of social communication within the team, and good, strong rituals, and also in the planning process and the understanding of dependencies between the teams. So the Worker Bee stuff absolutely supports that and contributes to it. But and as great as LinearB is, without those rituals and without being played into those conversations, then it's not going to work. So together with the rituals, together with the conversations, the socialization of change, so people know what's happening in the business, and it works very well.
It always has to be that combination. And I appreciate you, taking a little time to talk about LinearB, and we're really just a catalyst of what you've already been doing and helping with those conversations and the culture. Flipping us back to Unbabel, there's actually something that I was really wondering while we were talking earlier. When you're doing a language translation, there's so much nuances to the way that people might chat or type, or different slang, I guess, is what we would say in the US. And that's kind of evolving, I think, all the time throughout human history. How do you account for that?
Well, it's emojis. We also have to deal with cultural differences in tone, when to be polite, when to be formal, when to be informal. We also have corporate choices about how they communicate. So one company may decide to be very formal, another company may decide, hey, we sell a different style of product, we're going to be very informal. We spend a lot of time on vocabulary, so on term bases, and the translations of particular terms that are used, but also in the style. If you look at our machine translation engines, they have different styles, and we adapt machine translations to the way that a particular brand talks. So if you have a gaming company that's very informal with its customers, its machine translation service will work very differently in the same language to maybe that of a financial institution that talks to its customers in a very different and much more formal way. And that's a fundamental of adaptation and the way that we work. And then over time, because we're passing traffic through the engine, we're retraining constantly to understand the way that a company should be working. And we're using editor communities to validate and annotate and understand whether the machine translation is doing a great job. So it's quite an intensive process. You get to a communication style that fits a brand or fits a particular company.
That's really cool. You doing anything, I don't know if this is possible, but let's say that a translation has happened and that's been sent to the customer. Okay, here's like an answer to something. Are you able to also kind of read how the customer is responding to that and then learn, oh, this, I'm making it up here, but hey, this was a little too formal, or can you learn from the responses?
We can. We absolutely can. And one of the things that we allow the customers to do is feedback on the translation. So an important part of our process is to get that customer feedback. Oh, there was a mistake here. This term wasn't right. Oh, the tone wasn't right, or the customer complained about. And so, and we're very open with our customers about also the quality of the translations that we're providing to them, because we know most of the translations will hit them up, but there may be a small number of bad translations. We want to get them to optimize the service. So we want to understand, well, did we, for instance, rely on a machine translation and we shouldn't have, we should have sent it to a human? Or did the human not do a good translation? Didn't they understand the domain? Do we need to give them more context to make an accurate translation? So that focusing, and that's where you get to your continuous improvement. We know we're doing a good job because we spend a lot of time thinking about how we make incremental improvements to the translation quality in different language pairs that we work with. And a lot of the work that we do is around that.
That's really cool. Yeah, I guess that's the name of the game, continuous improvement, right?
Absolutely.
Now, I see that Unbabel has this global multilingual CX report that has come out. Was there anything from the report that you think would be interesting to tell our audience about?
Yes, there was fabulous stuff in the report that kind of backs up lots of the key messaging of the business, the importance of speaking the language of your customer, and the contribution to CSAT, and those sorts of metrics when you talk with and can work with the language of your customer. The ability to effectively service your business through digital channels. I think sometimes you read that customer service is cheap or free. And then you look at what big organizations do to service their customers. They have call center agents around the world. They have contracts with BPOs to handle the volume. They're obsessed with having people available to deal with issues and to deal with them quickly and successfully to get a positive outturn in a short period of time. And the role of language and the ability to manage language, we call it internally LangOps, your language operations, is absolutely fundamental to your organizational ability to do that. And actually, increasingly, if you think about what Unbabel is doing as a business, from the point of view, if you imagine you're a senior exec in any business, then you have language issues right the way through your business lifecycle, from the marketing you do and the sales contacts that you make, to the packaging and instructions in the products that you sell, to the way that you service your customers, you follow up and you deliver support. The way through that life cycle, you need to be able to work effectively in different languages if you want to be a global business. And increasingly, one of the things we see is that absolutely used to be the domain of the large multinational. But increasingly, it's the fast-growing organizations who are rolling their product out into different markets quickly, can't afford to maybe necessarily go out and recruit all of the native speakers that they need to manage the business at risk. And this sort of language operations will understand all of the bits of the way you use language as an organization, and to manage the efficiency and the resources that you have to deliver the best business outcome is a large part of the conversations that we have as a business. And I mean, I think LangOps, language operations, is becoming an increasingly part of lots of people's worlds.
Well, Jonathan, I want to thank you so much for coming on the pod today, talking to us about your career and how Unbabel Engineering is operating and some of the ways that you're utilizing LinearB. I know that you have a lot of hiring that's going on at Unbabel, probably a lot of engineering roles open. If I was interested in joining Unbabel's team, how could I do that?
Just contact us, perez@unbabel.com. We are hiring. We are hiring good engineers. We're hiring product designers, product management, product managers. We're hiring lots of people in the sales and go-to-market world in most of our teams. And what can you expect is a friendly, challenging, rewarding place to work. Working for a business that is changing the way people do things and building a more effective communication. So it is a great place to be working.
And I'll just, add on to that. I have worked closely with the Unbabel team. This is an elite engineering team. As we talked about, they have the right culture, the right processes. So if you are looking for your next opportunity, please check out Unbabel hiring opportunities. We'll include all of those links for you into the description below. Also, be sure to join the Dev Interrupted Discord community where we keep that type of conversation going all week long. I also wanted to say thank you to the more than 2,000 of you who are now subscribed to our weekly newsletter. We bring you articles from the community, inside information on weekly pods, and a first look at Interact 2.0 on April 7th, 2022. Again, Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on the pod today.
Thank you, Dan. It's been great to talk to you again.